What workforce trends and priorities are impacting the supply chain sector across Australia and New Zealand in 2026? Today we are joined by Alan Wynne, Managing Director for MiddleBank Consulting Group, and Dr. Robert Radics, Executive Director from Logistics Institute of Australia and New Zealand, to break down what is shaping hiring decisions, career choices and workforce planning across the supply chain sector. Supported by data from Australia and New Zealand's leading employment report, our guest industry experts will look at things such as what workforce priorities are leading the change for supply chain teams, which skills are becoming essential for supply chain professionals to have, what trends will shape the supply chain sector over the next 12 months, and are businesses moving quickly enough on AI or taking a right level of caution. Hello and welcome to People and Frog Recruitment's 2026 Supply Chain Market Analysis. I'm Mark Green, Western Sydney Branch Manager here in our Parramatta office, and jumping straight into it today, what trends are shaping the supply chain sector? Based on the latest data from the 2026 Employment and Salary Trend Report, let's quickly set the scene for the supply chain market. Heading into 2026, supply chain teams are still operating under real workforce pressure. Last year, turnover was relatively steady for many employers, but the stability did not remove the underlying challenges around retention, workload, and experienced talent. This year, the outlook remains cautious. We are still seeing continued movement across the workforce rather than a fully settled market. Hiring is being driven mainly by replacement needs, but is also being driven by business expansion, organizational transformation, and seasonal demand. That tells us the pressure is coming from several directions at once. Businesses are trying to keep operations moving. They are managing peak periods, responding to change, and filling critical gaps without adding too much strain to their existing teams. Demand is strongest across demand and supply, procurement, warehousing, operations, and production. These are core functions that sit close to delivery, service levels, and business continuity. So when hiring is delayed, operational pressures can build quickly. Another clear theme is under-resourcing. Many supply chain teams are still carrying more than they should. That means retention has become just as important as recruitment. Employers are leaning more heavily on career development, flexibility, overtime payments, allowances, and practical incentives to keep experienced people engaged. Overall, this is a cautious but active supply chain market. Stability is improving, but the pressure on teams has not disappeared. So from shifting candidate expectations to growing demand for specialist skills, employers are navigating big changes in 2026. To break down more about what is actually happening in the market across both Australia and New Zealand, we are joined today by Alan Wynne, Managing Director from MiddleBank Consulting Group, and Dr. Robert Radics, Executive Director from Logistics Institute of Australia and New Zealand. Thank you both for joining us today. I'll start first with you, Alan. Okay, so at the end of 2025, as our report says, professionals in the supply chain management space were stating they expected the market to remain under pressure with continued movement rather than a fully settled workforce. For you and your team, how would you describe the first half of 2026? And does that match up to what professionals were predicting at the tail end of last year?
Thanks, Mark. I think that the prediction has proven to be actually remarkably accurate. From both an Australian and New Zealand perspective, the market hasn't really settled. It has simply entered a different phase of evolution. If we look back over the past 5 or 6 years, supply chains have experienced successive waves of disruption from COVID-19, geopolitical tensions, inflationary pressures, changing trade patterns, and more recently, rapid advances in digital technologies and AI. Organizations have recognized that supply chain capability is now a strategic competitive advantage rather than simply an operational function. What we've seen during the first half of 2026 is less panic hiring than we experienced immediately after COVID, but certainly not a stable workforce. Instead, we're seeing continued movement driven by professionals looking for organizations that can offer broader career opportunities, greater flexibility, perhaps stronger organizational cultures, and increasingly work with purpose. From my own perspective, working across both Australia and New Zealand through consulting and as a professor at the University of Sydney, I've seen organisations become far more selective in their recruitment. They're no longer just looking for technical logistics or procurement skills. They're looking for people who can think strategically, work across functions, manage uncertainty, engage with technology, and build resilience into supply chains. And one of the interesting differences between Australia and New Zealand is scale. Australia generally has deeper labour market and more mobility between organisations and sector. New Zealand, on the other hand, as a market is a lot smaller. So when organisations experience supply chain professionals moving, the impact can be much more noticeable. It can take considerably longer to replace specialist talent, particularly in areas such as demand planning, supply chain analytics, procurement, integrated planning. So at the University of Sydney, for instance, we're also seeing this reflected in our students. Employer engagement remains exceptionally strong, and industry-sponsored projects continue to grow because organisations want graduates who can contribute from day one. Employers are increasingly using universities not just as recruitment pipelines, but as innovation partners. And I'm sure Rob will talk to that as well. Perhaps the biggest challenge or biggest change I've observed is that employers are placing far greater emphasis on adaptability than they were even 2 or 3 years ago. Technical skills remain important, but they're becoming easier to teach than qualities such as curiosity, resilience, collaboration, and systems thinking. So yes, I think the prediction was correct. The workforce hasn't settled. It has matured. Movement continues, but the reasons people are moving have changed. Today, it's less about simply changing jobs for higher salaries and more about finding organisations that invest in people, technology, learning, and long-term career development. Those organisations are proving much more successful at attracting and retaining such talent, I'd suggest.
Okay, thanks, Alan. So what would you say has been the biggest shift you've seen in what businesses are needing from their supply chain management teams this year?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest shift has been the recognition that supply chain professionals are no longer expected to simply manage the flow of goods. They're expected to help shape business strategy. 5 or 10 years ago, success was often measured by whether products arrived and on time, inventory was under control, costs were minimized. Those fundamentals remain important, but today businesses are asking much broader questions. How do we build resilience? How do we manage uncertainty? How do we use technology and AI to make better decisions? How do we balance cost with sustainability and customer expectations? That requires a very different capability from a supply chain team. So across both Australia and New Zealand, I'm seeing organisations place greater value on people who can interpret data, communicate with senior leadership, collaborate across finance, sales, operations, and procurement, and make informed decisions in increasingly complex environments. AI and digital technologies are accelerating this change. Rather than replacing supply chain professionals, they're changing the nature of the work. Routine planning and reporting are becoming increasingly automated, while a human role is shifting toward interpreting insights, managing exceptions, evaluating risk, and making strategic decisions. In other words, technology is enhancing the role, not diminishing it. Another significant shift is that supply chain is now central to organizational resilience. boards and executive teams are asking supply chain leaders questions that would once have been directed only to finance operations. They want confidence that the organization can respond quickly to disruptions, whether those arrive from geopolitical events that we've seen recently, climate-related impacts. Again, in New Zealand, we've seen that impact, cyber threats, changing customer demand, or supplier issues. There is also a stronger focus on sustainability and the circular economy. Organizations are increasingly looking beyond traditional measures like cost and service to consider emissions, ethical sourcing, waste reduction, resource efficiency, and broader social impact. Customers, investors, and regulators are all driving higher expectations in these areas. And so from an education perspective, this is exactly what we're seeing in our capstone projects at the University of Sydney, for instance. Industry partners are bringing us challenges that combine logistics, data analytics, AI, sustainability, resilience, and business transformation. They're looking for graduates who can think across the entire value chain, not just optimize one part of it. So if I had to summarize the biggest shift, I'd say businesses are looking for supply chain management professionals who are commercially minded, digitally confident, and able to influence strategic decisions. The role has evolved from managing supply chains to helping organizations compete through their supply chains. That's a profound change, and one that I think will continue to shape the profession over the coming years.
Our report shows that the top skills reported as most frequently needed in the age of AI include supply chain optimization at 47%, process automation at 45%, real-time data tracking at 35%, and predictive analytics at 35%. From your perspective, Alan, what skills or capabilities are you seeing as being the most essential for supply chain professionals to stay effective right now?
Again, a really great question, Mark. So thanks for that one. So if I had to answer, or if you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I probably would have said technical skills, inventory management, transport planning, procurement, warehouse operations, forecasting. Those are still important because they are the foundation of the profession, but today they're no longer enough on their own. The most successful supply chain professionals are those who combine technical expertise with business acumen and leadership capability. So the first capability I'd highlight is system thinking. Supply chains don't operate in isolation. Every decision affects customers, suppliers, finance, sustainability, manufacturing, and even brand reputation. Professionals need to understand the entire value chain, not just the function they work in. Secondly, data literacy and digital confidence have become essential. You don't necessarily have to be a data scientist, but you do need to be comfortable interpreting data, understanding predictive analytics, and increasingly working alongside AI-enabled decision support tools. AI itself isn't replacing supply chain professionals. It is making good professionals even more effective by allowing them to focus on judgment rather than routine analysis. So the third capability is adaptability. The pace of change is extraordinary. Whether it's geopolitical uncertainty, climate-related disruption, we've talked about these things already, changing customer expectations or new technology, supply chain professionals must be comfortable operating in environments where the answers aren't always obvious. Communication is another skill that has become critically important. Supply chain leaders today spend as much time influencing people as they do managing processes. They need to explain complex issues to executives, collaborate with suppliers, work alongside finance and sales teams, and build trusted relationships across the organization. I'd also add commercial awareness. Every supply chain decision has financial implications. The best professionals understand not only service and operational performance, but also profitability, cash flow, working capital, customer value, and risk. They understand that supply chain decisions are ultimately business decisions. And finally, perhaps, this is one that's becoming increasingly important. We need ethical leadership and sustainability thinking. Organizations are under growing pressure to reduce emissions, improve transparency, source responsibly, and contribute positively to society. Future supply chain leaders need to balance efficiency with resilience, profitability with sustainability, and shareholder value with broader stakeholder expectations. So from my perspective, again, using the University of Sydney as an example, this is exactly why our industry capstone projects are so valuable. Students don't just solve logistics problems, they work directly with organizations on complex real-world challenges that require technical knowledge, teamwork, critical thinking, communication, and leadership. Those experiences prepare them for the realities of today's profession. So if I was advising someone in entering the profession today, I'd say build a strong technical foundation, but don't stop there. Develop your commercial understanding, embrace technology, strengthen your communication skills, and learn to think strategically across the entire value chain. Those are the capabilities that will distinguish the next generation of supply chain leaders, I'd suggest.
Thanks, Alan. There's some good things to think about there. And my next question to you, how do you think the role of supply chain management teams have evolved over the last 6 months? And additionally, how have the expectations around what businesses are needing from their supply chain management teams changed along with that?
Okay. I'd actually say the role hasn't changed dramatically over the last 6 months, but what has changed is the pace at which it's evolving and the expectations being placed on supply chain teams. Across both Australia and New Zealand, executive leadership increasingly sees supply chain as a strategic capability rather than a support function. The conversation has shifted from how do we reduce costs to how do we create competitive advantage. Over the first half of 2026, we've seen organizations face ongoing uncertainty, whether that's geopolitical tensions, changing trade policies, cybersecurity concerns, climate-related disruptions, or rapid advances in AI. As a result, businesses are relying on their supply chain teams not just to react to disruption, but to anticipate it and prepare for it. That means the role has become much more proactive. Supply chain professionals are expected to identify emerging risks, evaluate different scenarios, strengthen supplier relationships, improve visibility across the value chain, and support better decision-making before problems occur. We're also seeing a much stronger expectation that supply chain leaders contribute to business strategy. They're increasingly involved in decisions around market expansion, sustainability, customer experience, product design, inventory investment, and digital transformations. In many organizations, supply chain now has a seat around the executive table or board table because leaders recognize that it influences almost every aspect of business performance. Technology has also accelerated expectations. AI, advanced analytics, and digital platforms are giving organizations access to more information than ever before. The challenge is no longer collecting data, it's turning that data into meaningful insights and taking action. Businesses are looking to supply chain teams to provide that insight and guide strategic decisions. Another noticeable shift is the move from managing individual functions to orchestrating the entire value chain. Traditionally, procurement, logistics, planning, and customer services often operated independently. Today, organizations are looking for much greater integration from suppliers through to customers, because that's where resilience, efficiency, and innovation are created. One area that's particularly noticeable in New Zealand is resilience. Given our geographic location and relatively small market, organisations have become very conscious of supply continuity and supplier diversity. In Australia, while scale provides more options, businesses are equally focused on building flexibility and responding quickly to changing market conditions. Perhaps the most significant change is that success is no longer measured solely by cost reduction or service levels. Businesses are now balancing multiple objectives: resilience, sustainability, customer experience, innovation, risk management, and financial performance. That's a much broader and more complex role than supply chain teams were expected to play just a few years ago. So from my consulting work and through the industry projects we supervise at University of Sydney, we're seeing organisations bring exactly these kind of challenges to us. They're asking students and professionals alike to solve problems that span technology, sustainability, strategy, and organisational change, not simply transport or inventory optimization. So I think the evolution over the past 6 months reflects a broader trend. Supply chain has become one of the key drivers of organisational success. The expectation today isn't simply to move products efficiently, it's to help the businesses become more resilient, more competitive, and better prepared, whatever that comes next, basically.
Thanks, Alan. And another question for you. Across the supply chain sector, how many teams are experiencing continued pressure around service delivery, workforce capability, and changing expectations? So looking ahead to the next 12 months, what trends or challenges do you think will be having the most impact on your team and the supply chain landscape?
Okay, so I think there are 5 major trends that will shape supply chain management over the next 12 to 18 months. And interestingly, none of them are really new. They're all accelerating. So the first is the geopolitical uncertainty and supply chain resilience. Whether it's changing trade policies, regional conflicts, sanctions, thanks Uncle Donald, or shifting international alliances, organizations are recognizing that global supply chains will remain volatile. Rather than assuming stability, businesses are designing networks that can adapt quickly. We're seeing greater supplier diversification, regional sourcing where appropriate, and more emphasis on building resilience rather than simply low-cost supply chains. Secondly, sustainability in the circular economy will continue to move from aspiration to expectation. Customers, investors, and regulators increasingly expect organizations to understand the environmental and social impacts of their supply chains. That means thinking beyond emissions to include responsible sourcing, waste reduction, product life extension, resource recovery, and ethical labor practices. Increasingly, sustainability is becoming a driver of innovation and competitive advantage, not just a compliance requirement. The third trend is talent and capability development. Technology will continue to evolve rapidly, but organizations are recognizing that people remain their greatest competitive advantage. The challenge isn't simply attracting talent, it's developing adaptable, commercially aware professionals who can lead through uncertainty. Lifelong learning and continuous upskilling will become essential for everyone working in supply chain management. The fourth trend I see is greater end-to-end collaboration. Organizations are moving away from optimizing individual functions towards optimizing the entire value chain. That means closer partnerships with suppliers, customers, logistics providers, government agencies, and even competitors in some sectors. Collaboration is increasingly becoming a strategic capability because no organization can build resilience on its own. And finally, I think customer expectations will continue to reshape supply chains. Customers expect greater speed, visibility, reliability, and flexibility than ever before. Whether they're consumers or businesses, they want accurate information, sustainable practices, and responsive service. So supply chains will increasingly be judged not only on efficiency, but on the overall customer experience they enable. From an Australian and New Zealand perspective, there's also an important regional dimension. Both countries are relatively remote trading nations. So investment in infrastructure, freight networks, ports, aviation, and skills development will remain critical. At the same time, we have significant opportunities to strengthen our resilience through closer regional collaboration across the Asia Pacific region. One trend that I'd particularly emphasize is that the profession itself is becoming more strategic. Supply chain leaders are increasingly contributing to decisions around growth, investment, sustainability, and organizational resilience. That shift will continue well into 2027. So if I had to summarize the future in one sentence, I'd say something like the organizations that succeed won't necessarily have the cheapest supply chains. They'll have the most resilient, collaborative, and adaptive ones. In an increasingly uncertain world, resilience has become a source of competitive advantage.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you for those insights. I'd like to bring in our second guest for today's update, Dr. Robert Radics, the Executive Director for Logistics Institute, Australia and New Zealand. Rob, thanks for joining us today. So my questions to you, well, I guess my first question, for you and your team, how would you describe the first half of 2026? And does that match up to what professionals were predicting at the tail end of last year?
So first of all, I kept nodding while Alan was speaking because his words are gold and hard to add anything. I think the key that uncertainty is with us. So we expected a dramatic recovery after issues, after COVID, after tariff war, after Iran war, but there is no dramatic recovery. So uncertainty with us. Everyone started to focus on supply chain resilience and not simply operational savings or cost reduction. Therefore, we continuously monitor what's happening. We provide dashboard reports. We support the industry with live data. And this is a big change. So for my team, new capabilities needed, collaboration, soft skills and hard skills together, as Alan mentioned before. It's not just being good in analytics, understand the basics of logistics, but you really need to talk to people and sell your knowledge.
Have you or your team seen any shifts over the past 6 months in the priorities, pressures, or expectations that may not have been there previously?
Okay, so earlier we focused on cost reduction, and but now instead of just in time, we have the just in case system. So everyone has higher inventories for safety to support the customers properly. The other trend, instead of the single sourcing, now everyone turn to the multiple suppliers model, because you don't know where you can get your supply. So, but these are, I think, technical skills, technical changes. The real changes that a supply chain or logistic professional, now it's not expected to solve problems, service well the organization, but rather link everything together from sales via procurement, operations, finance, and even they have to be comfortable to talk in the boardroom. So this is the biggest change what I see, that supply chain come from the back office to the boardroom.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And from your perspective, what skills or capabilities are becoming most important for professionals to stay effective in 2026?
Adaptability. Alan mentioned that before. Some of us better in with numbers, others better in talking. But these soft and hard skills have to be together in supply chain management and logistics. Otherwise, you cannot really get to the top or being a recognized leader in that arena. So a kind of superhumans, what Alan described, but maybe that is exaggeration. But definitely, you cannot focus in a particular area. Even if you focus in a particular area, you have to understand the big picture. You are building a castle. You are not moving rocks. So it's a different approach today. Okay, we have to learn how to use AI. AI makes you faster. You have to use analytical softwares. It will support your decision making. But at the end of the day, someone has to make sense of all of that information, both qualitative and quantitative information. And that is the stage when an experienced supply chain person needed.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And how do you think the role of supply chain management teams has evolved over the last 6 months? And additionally, how have the expectations around what businesses are needing from their supply chain management teams changed along with that?
This is a longer trend, as Alan mentioned. It just accelerated. That instead of being a support function in an organization to deliver goods from A to B, serve the customers, now supply chain teams has to understand the entire value creation process of the company. They can contribute to marketing, what makes sense, how to sell something, where to sell, what to promise for the customers, but also the pricing, operations management, understand everything, how much supply they need, in which schedule, on what kind of schedule. So they have to be atop of all of that processes. How they are different from the CEO? I think they just know more details. So this is the trend that supply chain managers, people in supply chain management, have to understand the entire process and value creation. If they understand that, they identify their role better, and they can contribute more.
Great, thank you, Rob. And looking ahead to the next 12 months, what do you think will be the biggest challenge for you and your team, and how do you think teams will need to respond?
Competition is fierce. It's not just uncertainty, but competition is fierce. Expectations regarding AI are high from the consumer side, but also shareholders want you to be better, save money, and produce more. And it's happening, and it's very challenging. I have to use AI every day, and sometimes it's frustrating, but also very productive. So I think the biggest challenge what we face to adapt fast, and also to pick up new skills. Even we are getting older, the new technologies, new developments are coming. So it will never stop. I remember then when my grandparents cannot understand the remote control, how the television changed for that. Sometimes I feel that we face of the AI challenges like that, and experienced people, experienced managers have to learn that tool, but also they have to be good in understanding analytical data. So Alan mentioned that analytical skills are needed for leaders, but also leadership and communication skills needed for all employees in supply chain management and logistics.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, I'd like to bring both of you in for a broader view across both markets, looking at AI and its impacts on the supply chain space. I'd like to start first with you, Dr. Robert. So despite the reliance on AI everywhere nowadays, only 22% of supply chain teams stated that they're focusing on AI and tech upskilling in 2026. In the supply chain space, do you think businesses are moving fast enough with AI, moving too slowly, or taking the right level of caution? And how do you think AI is starting to shift the roles and expectations within teams?
Businesses follow a sensible approach because we don't know how it will pan out exactly. It's a revolution, but you don't know how to get the most out of it. As I mentioned before, expectations are high, but you cannot deploy AI just for the sake of applying a new technology because it's fancy or someone on the board in the boardroom ask you to do that. It should deliver something. It should solve a problem. And I think what companies do when they see that there is a problem what AI can solve, they apply AI and very rapidly apply AI in these areas. Where they cannot see that advantage, they are waiting and see what's happening around. Big companies like SAP or Oracle, they are already scared because of this revolution, AI revolution, and many jobs will be affected. Hopefully, we will come out with a higher productivity and better life quality. Just happened in the case of industrial revolution. We will see soon.
And what about from your perspective, Alan? Are you seeing similar patterns in how businesses are approaching AI, and how is that beginning to shift expectations within teams?
So my answer may seem a little contradictory. I actually think the honest answer to your original question of are businesses moving fast enough, moving too slowly, or taking the right level of caution, I actually think the answer is all three. And it depends on the organization. So across Australia and New Zealand, we're seeing a very mixed picture. Some organizations are moving extremely quickly, piloting AI across demand forecasting, inventory optimization, transport planning, procurement, customer service. Others are taking a much more cautious approach, while many are still trying to understand where AI can genuinely add value. Personally, I don't think the question is whether businesses are moving fast enough. I think it's the more important question is whether they're moving intelligently. We've seen this before with technologies like ERP systems, big data, blockchain. The organizations that achieved the greatest success weren't necessarily the first adopters. They were the ones that clearly understood the business problem they were trying to solve. AI is exactly the same. The greatest risk isn't moving too slowly, it's implementing AI because it's fashionable rather than because it solves a genuine business challenge. So supply chains generate enormous amounts of data every day. AI can help us identify patterns, improve forecasting, optimize inventory, detect disruptions earlier, and support better decision making. Those are tremendous opportunities. But AI also depends on good data, sound governance, and experienced people who understand the context behind the recommendations. If the underlying data is poor or the business processes aren't well designed, AI will simply produce poor decisions more quickly. That's why I often say that AI doesn't replace supply chain expertise, it amplifies it. Good professionals become more effective because AI removes much of the routine analysis, allowing them to focus on judgment, relationships, innovation, strategic thinking. Conversely, if an organization lacks capabilities, AI won't solve that problem. I also think that there's a difference between Australia and New Zealand. Larger Australian organisations often have greater resources to invest in AI, experimentation and specialist capability. New Zealand organisations, particularly given that we're a lot of essentially small to medium-sized enterprises, tend to be more selective and pragmatic, looking for proven applications with a clear return on investment before committing significant resources. So given the structure of New Zealand economy, that's often an entirely sensible approach. And so one point I'd emphasize is that the biggest barrier isn't the technology itself, it's organizational readiness. Successful AI adoption requires leadership, commitment, skilled people, good quality data, strong governance, and a culture that's willing to embrace change. Technology is only one part of the equation. So looking ahead, I don't think the competitive advantage will come from simply having AI. AI will become increasingly accessible to everyone. The advantage will come from how effectively organizations integrate AI with talented people, robust processes, and strong leadership. That's where the real value will be created.
Big thank you to both of you for your time today and for giving us some incredible insights into this market. If anybody watching today is wanting to reach out to get in touch with either Alan Wynne and MiddleBank Consulting Group or Dr. Robert Radics and Logistics Institute of Australia and New Zealand, you can visit the comments for all of their information below. Alan and Dr. Robert, thank you once again. Just a reminder that all the insights shared today are based off our 2026 Employment and Salary Trends Report. If you'd like a deeper dive into salaries, benefits and workplace trends across your market, you can request a copy today by scanning the QR code on screen now or clicking the link in the comments below. Lastly, whether you're looking to grow your career or build your team with the right talent, the People to People Group can help. As an award-winning recruitment agency, we operate across Australia, with specialist teams in every major market. Across the ditch in New Zealand, we've proudly recruited for over 24 years through Frog Recruitment with offices in both Auckland and Wellington. Contact details are on the screen now or see the links in the comments to reach out to one of the teams today. And if you're looking for help with your recruitment here in Parramatta, New South Wales, please reach out to myself, Mark Green, on the details in the comments as well. Thank you very much for joining us today for our 2026 Supply Chain Market Update, and see you next time.